Welcome back to Lesson 2 in the Hermeneutics Masterclass on the Boring Truth. I am JC Lamont, your host, and let's dive right into number 2. When I left you last, we talked about how if the one and only true interpretation of Scripture is the result of accurately applying the rules of the LGH method, and if the majority of people within conservative evangelical Protestantism agrees on this, why are there so many different conservative evangelical interpretations? I posed the question, are the rules really that difficult to accurately apply? And I said no. The reason for Protestant chaos was football. Now, what did I mean by that? Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up. This, of course, is football. But in the UK, this is also football. Now imagine if the UK invited the US to come play football with them, and the NFL showed up. All the players go out onto the field, and there is utter chaos. Why? Why? Because some are kicking the ball, others are throwing the ball. The UK is screaming foul because the US is touching the ball with their hands, and the US is screaming back, I'm allowed to touch the ball with my hands, you dingbat, it requires gameplay. And the UK waves the official handbook of football and says, it's a foul, and the US waves the official handbook of football and says, it's not a foul. The LGH method is not difficult to apply. The reason that Protestantism is in absolute chaos and is fractured into 9 different interpretational families, and as the result of them, 41,000 denominations, under the umbrella of those 9 different interpretational families, is because there are 2 methods of interpretation with 2 different sets of rules. And both of those methods go by the name of literal, grammatical, historical method of interpretation. I kid you not. And because both methods go by the same name, there is a great deal of confusion. Let's say you want to play UK football, and you read a football rule book that says throw the ball with your hands. Or let's say you want to play US football, and you read a football rule book that says it's a violation to throw the ball with your hands. Or let's say that you want to play UK football, and you read a football rule book that says it's a violation to touch the ball with your hands. But when you get out onto the field, you're literally the only one not touching the ball with your hands. You would naturally be very confused. In this Hermeneutics Masterclass, what I will be teaching you is both sets of rules. I'm going to show you which set of rules go with which LGH method. And then you will be able to decide for yourself which interpretation and which doctrines are the result of which set of rules. And then you can decide which game you want to play, i.e. which doctrines you want to believe. Which doctrines you believe are the one and only true interpretation of the correct LGH method to use. Now, if all of this seems really daunting, it's actually really, really easy. Because the rules, regardless of which set of rules you follow, are very easy to apply. The chaos that we see within Protestantism is not the result of either one of the LGH games being difficult to play, or either set of rules being complicated to follow. The chaos is the result of thinking there is only one set of rules and only one game being played. Once you realize there are 2 different games, and once you know which set of rules belong to which game, it's very simple. You pick the rules that you want to follow and play the game that results when you follow those rules. If you play by the rules that allow you to touch the ball, you're playing theological football. If you play by the rules where touching the ball is a foul, you're playing theological soccer. It really is that simple. But before we move on to that, you need to be convinced that there are 2 different games being played. Because if you're anything like I was, you don't really think there are 2 games. You just think that there is soccer and there is defective soccer. But football is not defective soccer. Football is football. And once you really understand that, like I do now, it makes things a lot easier. Let me give you an example.
Many years ago, I sat in church listening to the preacher preach about how God desires the salvation of all men. And in sitting there and thinking about that, in a reforming church, I was puzzled as to why the preacher would be preaching that in the way that he was, meaning exactly what he was saying. And to me, that was contradictory to my understanding of what God's decrees meant. that God did by his most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass. So if God desires something, he gets it.
The moment Westminster Confession of Faith popped up at the bottom of the screen, you know that he is not playing the LGH game in which there is no creed but the Bible. Now, if you were like me, you were taught the no creed but the Bible rule. And so when you saw that, flames erupted from the side of your head and you shouted, "Foul, illegal gameplay, eisegetical violation of the rules." I mean, you very calmly thought to yourself, oh, he is completely unaware that appealing to the Westminster Confession of Faith is a violation of the LGH method of interpretation. Someone should tell him, and then he will be so happy to have learned the rules. And he will be forever grateful that someone pointed out to him how to accurately apply the LGH method. I have found out the hard way. It doesn't work that way. Because he is playing the original Protestant literal grammatical historical game. The original Protestant LGH game allowed the use of confessions of faith. That's how Protestantism worked. It's how you picked which Protestant denomination you wanted to attend. We saw that in the previous lesson. If you lived in the 16th, 17th, or 18th century and were a Calvinist, it was because you believed the Calvinist interpretation as summarized in the Westminster Confession of Faith. And so if you read the Bible and you were undecided on 2 or 3 different interpretations, the Westminster Confession of Faith determined which interpretation was correct. If you didn't think that was the correct one, if you chose interpretation number 2 or interpretation number 3, then you left the Calvinist church and you joined the Protestant church whose confession of faith aligned with the interpretation you believed to be correct. So here's what's so important to understand. The no creed but the Bible rule is not the updated Protestant LGH rulebook. And 2 Wills of God bro just never got the updated rulebook. As if he's still playing LGH version 1.0 and the rest of us are playing LGH version 2.0. The no creed but the Bible rule is part of a rulebook of a different game. When I wanted to scream foul, calmly explain the no creed but the Bible rule to 2 Wills of God bro, it was because I viewed the game he was playing like an illegal underground fight club. I didn't realize he was playing the original Protestant LGH game. A game which was obviously a legitimate way, the only way to interpret the scriptures for the first several hundred years of Protestantism. If you or I had been born in the 16th, 17th, or 18th century, and we were a Protestant, we would have belonged to a church with a confession of faith. And that confession of faith is what told us what was the correct interpretation. It served as the guide that allowed us to choose the correct interpretation from multiple options. What I now realize is that the no creed but the Bible rule does not make the entire previous game go from a legitimate way to interpret the scripture to an illegal fight club. If a game played for 300 plus years requires touching the ball with your hands, and then someone comes along and says, play this game where touching the ball with your hands is a foul, they have invented a brand new game. They have not made the 300-year plus game suddenly illegal to play. They have invented soccer, a game in which touching the ball with your hands is a violation. It is a completely different game. Football is not defective soccer. Football is football. Now, and this is also very important to understand, whether or not the game can be played with a confession of faith or not is not what defines each LGH method. In other words, whether or not a game allows a confession of faith is not the defining feature of each LGH game. Having a confession of faith was just the example I used because it was the easiest and quickest way for me to show you that there are 2 different games being played. Whether or not you can have a confession of faith is just one of many, many differences between the 2 different LGH methods of interpretation. They really do have their own complete set of rules. Of course, those of us who were taught the no creed but the Bible were taught to yell foul when we see someone using a creed. But that's just because shouting foul when someone doesn't interpret the Bible the same as we do is what everyone was taught to do. Nevertheless, football is its own sport. Football is a 500-year Protestant game. Soccer is a 200-year Protestant game. Soccer is not the new and improved version of football. Soccer is its own game. Soccer has its own rules. Football is its own game. Football has its own rules. When we understand which set of rules go with which game, we can then choose which game's rules we believe in. And when we play the game according to those rules, we will either be playing football / soccer, or we will be playing football / rugby. But that will be up to you. I will not be telling you which set of rules you should follow or which game you should play. Only you can decide that. But I will caution you, don't decide yet. You only know one rule. In one, a confession of faith is required gameplay, and in the other, a confession of faith is a violation. You need to know all the rules, and you need to understand the game of football and understand the game of soccer before you decide which rules you want to follow, i.e. which game you want to play. Okay, but before we get into that, if two different games with two different rules being played on the same field at the same time, both going by the same name, wasn't confusing or chaos-inducing enough, there is yet another reason for Protestant chaos, but we will unpack that reason in Lesson 3. Leave me a comment and let me know if you are on board with the idea that there are two different games being played, that you're not like I was and thinking, West Two Wills of God, bro, is playing defective soccer. Like, do you get that? Oh, he's playing football and I was raised to play soccer. Let me know if you're tracking with that, and because it will make a lot more sense as we start talking about the different games. If you agree that there are two different games with two different sets of rules, and not just thinking that Two Wills of God bro just doesn't know how to play soccer. Okay, so if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you do not miss the next lesson. And until next time, keep standing firm.